Okay. Everyone can hear me? Well, I understand there was a question about Zope. So this is actually going to be a fairly brief discussion of it. It's not so much, I'm not going to be so much arguing at this point the point of view of using Zope as an application server platform for all your needs. I'm going to actually look at a fairly limited use case, and that is actually it can probably be applied in some other cases too, but I'm particularly familiar with this use case, so I think I'd like to talk about it. And that's not so much using Zope, but using a product that's built on Zope that fulfills most of my needs, and extending it to fulfill the other requirements that my customer needs. And the product I'm talking about is Plone, which is a content management system built on Zope. Now, so I'm talking about it. This is a perfectly legitimate use case when you're looking for a framework, when you're trying to build an application. Is there an existing application out there that gives you 90% of what you need? Is there an existing application out there that gives you the framework with which you can extend and give the final product that you want? You want to look at that as much as possible. Since the last time we talked about Django, which is a full stack framework, it's worth talking about that particular paradigm. But full stack could also mean a product built on top of the stack. So if that seems a little bit odd to be talking about a framework that way, then it's a little bit odd to be talking about Django as a framework too, because it is a full stack. If you want to talk about something that's, in my opinion, a true framework that you can build anything you want into it, you want something a little bit more basic, something a little bit less full stacky than Django. I don't want to turn this into a competition.
Do it.
I know. I'm not going to do that.
That means you lose the competition.
Because I think the winning case here is that you can do pretty much, you can create pretty much anything you need in any of these application frameworks. They're largely a matter of different ways of getting to the same end. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Sure, we can gripe about those, but you can pretty much build anything you want out of any of these Python frameworks. So I think it's kind of a losing proposition to start saying mine is better than yours. I can demonstrate a particular use case which I think this works nicely with, and that's what I'm going to do. But before I do that, I'm pretty sure a lot of people here are unfamiliar with Zope, so a little bit of background, because Zope is like the granddaddy of application platforms in the Python world. Django has got a pretty large mind share these days, but before Django, Zope went through the same kind of rocketing rise to popularity. Yes.
Is this the sort of granddaddy that gives you candy when you visit, or the sort of granddaddy that yells at you to get off the wall? How's Zope aged well?
This is where I'm going to get to. You see all these little icons here? Actually, this is the Zope community. These are all application frameworks, and they all come. I just call them the Zope family. So when you talk about what can you build in Zope, you have to kind of realize that Zope's got a long history, and there's a lot of children involved with Zope. There's a lot of different ways in which the Zope libraries have been used. So just a really quick history, just so you get a little bit of background. So we're talking granddaddy here, right? So 1996 was a commercial app server called Principia. And the core components were Bobo and document template and Bobo POS. It was pretty groundbreaking. groundbreaking, excuse me, when it came out. An object database, the first probably really good object database, in my opinion, that came out of the Python community, and I don't know. Anyway, so and Bobo, which was the way in which the objects were published out of the database. Now, it was open source in 1998. That's what became Zope. And all the names were changed at that point. Pretty quickly became Zope 2. And so it's been called Zope 2 for a long time. And it's, like I said, a full stack application. So it comes with all kinds of things that you need for building a web application. It was very groundbreaking. So there were a lot of mistakes made and a lot of lessons learned along the way. But there's quite a lot of Python, quite a lot of bits that ended up actually in Python core that came originally from the Zope work. So it's worth noticing that. But after a while, there were certain ideas that people started to realize weren't good. One of which was being a full stack platform, very tightly integrated. It's very hard to use pieces out of it. You had to take it whole. It was very hard to replace bits of it. You could, but it was difficult. The programming paradigms within this framework were different enough from other stuff in Python that, you know, the description unPythonic or non-Pythonic was used by some people who disliked the Zope way of doing things. So we had it, unfortunately, it developed into two opposing camps, which still exist to this day because of that history. People still remember that. There are people who got involved in Zope programming and did not really get involved in the rest of the Python community, and that created problems. The Zope community eventually realized that was a problem, and one of the problems was they realized that in order to do get take-up from some of their great work from, in other places, they had to break up their software into usable components that other people could use. The work for that was they first called that Zope 3, which is intended to be the replacement for Zope 2 when the work first started. After they worked on it for a while, they started to realize that that end goal was impractical. And then there was a little period of confusion because now we had Zope 2 and we had Zope 3, and they were on parallel development paths, and there was no way they were going to merge. Zope 2 started to use some of the libraries out of Zope 3, but there was no way that Zope 2 framework would ever be replaced by Zope 3. So skipping past some of these things in between, you notice way down in the bottom there, what eventually happened is they realized that they would separate out the components that could be generally used by other frameworks into a toolkit, and then they renamed Zope 3 into Bluebeam. So Bluebeam would be the app server part of Zope 3. So now the Zope toolkit now becomes the library that other pieces can use. So if you take a look, in 2006, there was another app server called Rock. That uses the Zope toolkit. Before it was using libraries out of Zope 3, but now it uses the toolkit, ZDK. And then Repos and Repos BFG. It uses a Zope toolkit. And of course, Pyramid, which I'm pretty sure you had a discussion about, uses bits out of the Zope toolkit also. So, when you're talking about these days, what can you do? What kind of apps you want to develop in Zope? You're either talking about building off some existing legacy system that was based on Zope 2 and extending it, or you're building something brand new in one of these other children, Grok, Repos, well, actually, not Repos BFG anymore, because that was the one that eventually got renamed into Pyramid when it got merged into the Pylons project. So that really exist as a separate entity anymore. Bobo, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Bobo, but it's a micro framework also based on the Zope toolkit, but I really don't know anybody who uses it. It's kind of an interesting framework. You do. I like to talk to you. Anyhow, Bobo, it's a little confusing because it's sharing the name historically with the other application that first started this whole thing, but it's a different beast. So, I'm not going to talk about using Bluebrain or Grok. There are people who are doing that, but quite frankly, the Zope community that's on the cutting edge of these things, a lot of them are migrating over to Pyramid. So while Bluebrain's perfectly nice, it's a very large stack, a lot of dependencies. And while Grok is very nice, it's got that entire convention over configuration paradigm down really nicely. It hasn't had as much take-up either as Pyramid has. And it also has a fairly significant stack of dependencies. When you bring in one library, you're bringing in all kinds of things. Pyramid has done a better job of disentangling the dependencies. No, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is extending an existing application, right? What kind of apps are built with Zope? And in particular, I'm talking about Zope 2 here, right? Maybe you're familiar with some of these. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Xenos. Okay, we got Xenos, CPS, Plone, Launchpad. Of course, people have heard of Launchpad, right? Okay. No, hang on a sec. Let's get my notes back up.
Have 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, so let me just screen past this. We don't really have to talk about these guys that much, so I'm going to skip through this. First of all, why would we be using Plone? Well, Plone's a content management system. In my opinion, it's the best content management system out there, open source content management system. It's got outstanding SEO built into it. Most sites, good sites built with Plone usually rank fairly well because it's well thought out how to lay out the site. It's got really advanced user and workflow management. It's got an excellent security record. It's multilingual. Supports like 40 languages or something. Multilingual in both in the application itself, and it supports multilingual in the content space too. So it's actually a fairly nice solution if you need a multilingual site. So kind of ready to use. It's easy to use as an end user. Doesn't require that much training at all. I found that people are able to use pick up what you need to do in Plone fairly easy. I give them a little pamphlet that I've written myself, and they're off and running within a day. They're pretty good. If you need it, it's easily integrated with external authentication sources or external databases. Although remember, it is built on Zope 2, so it's based on the Zope object database, which I'll talk about in just a minute. I know we only have 5 minutes, so let's scream through that. It's easy to extend. People will debate that. There's a debate here, whether Plone the application versus Plone the framework. It's always this big old debate in the community. It is primarily an application, but there's a huge number of people I've done it. They make a lot of their income out of Plone the framework, because people need the application, but they need to build additional functionality. So there are two clear problem domains where this fits, and that would be intranet, extranet, groupware, and collaboration, and anything related to content management problems. It's a really good fit for that if your application requires that, or at least a significant portion of your application requires that. This is worth considering this as a core for your application. I'm not going to talk about the programming concepts because I'm out of time, except maybe object publishing and traversal. Data, how much time do I have?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, wow. Okay, are people familiar with an object database? I'm pretty sure you've heard several discussions about how you map URLs to your views or whatnot, and you know whether it's via some routes, some variant of some route system, where you're matching some URL pattern, and you're actually you're actually in each case matching a pattern to a particular view class or whatnot. That's the route pattern. The traversal pattern is a little bit different, and it leverages off the object database. And the way the traversal pattern works is that you think of it like a flowchart. Go through each of the elements of a URL, and you start at the root of the database, and each element in the URL it just basically looks in the root for that object, whether it's an object, a method, an attribute, value of a key, or, there's a few things that it looks for. It finds that object, then it takes the next element of the URL, and then within that object, does that object contain a method, contain another object, contain a key that matches that segment, and you just run through the URL that way. So you traverse through the URL, you're actually physically traversing through the containment hierarchy of the object database. But since it can match more than just objects itself, you can also match methods and keys and whatnot. You can do some pretty creative things with that. So I like this quote from John Stahl, where he just, who's former foundation president, but it doesn't matter. Data in Zope is like a flowchart. Data in other web-like application frameworks is like a spreadsheet. You're not just mapping a URL to something. You're actually going through each one of the elements, and you're flowing through it and matching each one. Because of that, it has to do some fairly complicated security checks and all this kind of stuff to make sure that you're actually allowed to get where you're trying to go.
Do you have some examples to show?
Not here. I can, but if I have time, maybe I can show it right after this one. Well, actually, let me just hit this last slide right here, just to kind of hit this key point. Okay, so why would you use Plone, again, as an application server, right? Well, first of all, Plone is a CMS app, so it's a full stack framework with a product built on top of it. It can be extended because it has full access to the Zope application platform. You can be extended to support most any web app you need, but its sweet spot is where your solution needs a significant amount of the CMS functionality that's already built in, or your needs can be reasonably modeled as content-ish objects. If not, then probably you're better off with a different kind of a framework. In particular, if you're dealing with something that's very tabular, described as sets of data in a table, you're talking more likely, you're not talking about an object database, you're talking probably a relational database, and you're talking about a completely different animal. And while you can connect to a relational database, if that's not your core need, then you're probably better off going somewhere else. So that's the story I wanted to tell about that. It's a perfectly legitimate way of thinking about app development. Let's see. What is the best way of showing? I'm trying to think just off the top of my head. What's the best way to demonstrate traversal?
That's the code that you
not on
Nobody
this.
wants you to type any code.
No, you don't want me to type any code.
You got a Zope admin?
How's that?
A Zope admin interface?
We did see a little bit of it in the pyramid talk.
Yeah, we did.
Because Jason showed some traversal as an alternative to groups.
Okay.
Is that the same stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you saw a little bit about that in there. So, I mean, I could try to log into one of these things. Unfortunately, this is not my personal laptop. This is my new job that I just picked up, and it doesn't have my credentials on it. So.
Yeah. Any other questions other than show us the stuff? What?
So I have some experience using Zope and using a contract management system that's an ancestor of Plone. And we found that the ZODB was a centralized point that choked our application's performance because everything had to write to the ZODB. What's the state of the art on handling sort of concurrent ZODB instances or handling cases where you have more clients trying to talk to the database than the database server can sustain?
Yeah, that's been shown to be a particular weak point. If you have a high write condition, then you get contention issues, right? If there's any way you can model your processes in such a way that you can do the commits in a synchronous process of some sort, then that's a little bit better. Ultimately, you're going to, I mean, there are ways of distributing your ZODB across using a kind of a ZO framework, but ultimately you still got the choke point where they have to share the central version. There are ways of distributing the core database, Zope Replication Services, which is actually a commercial product put out by Zope company, which it's actually a corporation, does that, and there are people who do other things for that sort of thing to distribute the load. There is the other possibility too, because there is, I don't remember the name of it offhand, you don't have to use a ZODB. You can use a relational database and pretend it's a ZODB. There's a couple of libraries that do that, and it's possible. I've heard cases where the write contention is a little bit easier. You can leverage some of these other relational databases. But so yeah, there's other solutions for that.
Any other questions? Yep.
What do you lose if you choose to use a relational database with Plone as opposed to the ZODB? Is it just magic, or are there any downsides?
It's magic.
The good kind of magic.
Yeah, it just works actually. I've used it in one case, and it just seems to work magically. You don't even notice it. Oh, that's one of the advantages to consider to using an object database. ORMs are magic. They work. They're nice, and especially if you're using SQL Alchemy. I mean, if you're stuck with using a Django ORM, maybe a little less magic, but it works, right? Sorry, I had to throw that in. It works, but you have to worry about your models a little bit more. You have to worry about your persistence a bit more. With the ZODB and the application framework behind it, you don't. I mean, it just, your objects, you make them subclass off of persistent, and they automatically persist themselves. You don't have to worry about committing them. You can create hierarchies, and I think it's the nirvana of NoSQL. I mean, you can put anything into a ZODB and nest it any way you want. You don't have to predefine your schemas. So. Anyhow, but like I said, you can pretend, you can back it with a relational database, and it looks like an object database to Zope. So there's some people who argue that you might as well just use one of these backends anyway instead of Zope. But I don't know really what the consensus is on that.
One last question.
So have you used any other objects databases like MongoDB, and how does it compare to the ZODB?
I've used it, but not in this kind of use case.
A big difference between them is that ZoDB is storing Python objects.
Sure.
And MongoDB is storing JSON documents, basically.
Right.
So you have to convert your Python objects into
And you can.
JSONable data for Mongo.
And you can. I don't know of anybody who does that. But yeah, I can see that you would do that. I mean, you can, rather than essentially pickling or JSONifying your objects, you know. But
Thank you, Ricardo.
sure.